My class, I teach 3 sections of freshman reading. It's called Reading Language Arts. And the freshmen that are in my class are placed in my class because they are several grade levels below in reading especially, and for the most part also math. So these are students who are reading at a 5th or 6th grade level, and this year I'm actually not guessing. I've done independent reading inventories with them one-on-one. And have done, these assessments where I can actually pinpoint the level that they're at. So these are students that struggle with reading, that walk in, the first day of school with very strong negative feelings about reading. They will identify themselves as non-readers. They hate reading. And typically they've not done well academically in elementary school. So there's that. Also, out of my 43 freshmen, 20 of my students have IEPs. So half are diverse learners. So that's my population. Those are the students that I'm working with. And I believe inquiry is the best way to actually engage my students. It's not just for high-performing students, but because of the flexibility, because it's individualized, because it's engaging, it's relevant to their lives, there's application to who they are. All of these things engage my students. Because I let them read in class and I do one-on-one conferences, I get to know them as readers. I coach them through the text. They support each other. All of I couldn't just roll out an inquiry unit week 1. There's a lot of community building that I did before rolling out this unit. And I think when you do all of those things, you acknowledge how students are feeling and you validate that. And that's what you see in my room, what makes reading challenging, why do we read? Why is it hard for us? What can we do about it? We spent 3 weeks talking about that. Then they feel safe, they feel comfortable, they're less afraid, they trust me. And then inquiry, doing this kind of investigation and exploration where they know I'm not looking for a right answer, or I'm not even looking for an answer. It's respecting their thinking. Then nobody feels like I'm going to be wrong. I didn't say what teacher was looking for, what she was expecting. We don't do, multiple choice tests and quizzes and things like that. It's really them communicating their thinking. So the name of the unit is The Power of Stories, and it is a unit that uses the book Darkroom, which is a memoir, and it's a graphic novel. And the unit is about, I really wanted students to think about how the culture, history, and society impact a person's identity, and looking at Darkroom to see how those 3 kind of elements impact the writer's identity, and then having the students explore how those factors kind of influence their own identities. So how their culture, how this time that we're living in, and how society influences the people they are today. And that's part of it, but then the other part is, why is it important to tell these stories to others? Why do our stories matter? Do they matter? Do other people hear them? Should they hear them? How do we create stories that really communicate who we are and help us kind of build empathy with one another? Because I think my students feel like people don't really understand who they are, and one way to build that understanding is through storytelling. I have teacher jargon goals, and I have my essential questions that I introduce to the students and that we spend the whole unit kind of revisiting and making sure that we're focused on addressing those questions. They're never answered, but we're working towards some kind of deeper understanding of those questions. So really it's using storytelling to build empathy. I think empathy is a missing piece right now in our world today, and it's something that we could all improve in developing in ourselves, and kind of taking ownership in helping other people be more empathetic. And then we talk a lot about identity in school, but really I want students to think about not just, I want them to have a more rounded kind of view of what shapes identity, and culture is part of it, but also there are other things, other forces that play into that. And then I feel like one thing that's really hard to do in a unit that I'm aiming for in this unit is to integrate reading and writing into one unit so that the reading that we're doing influences and complements the writing that we're doing. So the writing piece is, how do I tell my own story using Darkroom as a model, but what decisions do authors make in order to create an impactful story? How can I do that? So my students are going to do that by creating a multi-genre memoir by the end of the unit. I really want students to use this unit as an opportunity to explore themselves. So when we think about inquiry, and this exploration of questions and topics and ideas, a lot of times when I plan those units, it's looking at content that is outside of ourselves. And I would like this unit to be an inquiry into the self. And for my students to start thinking about, why am I the way I am today? Why do I have these feelings about certain things? Why do I have these beliefs? Where do these beliefs come from, right? Who am I today? And how do I want to project myself to others? And so I'm most excited to see how students, the journey that they take and that I hope they take into exploring themselves more. And really the family connection is kind of a unique part of this unit that I have not incorporated into other units. So for example, one of the assignments for this unit that my students have done in preparation for their multi-genre memoir is an interview with a family member. And so they used their phones and they recorded these interviews and they played them in class, and bringing their families into the classroom, bringing those voices into the classroom. We had 3 different languages in the classroom. I mean, that whole experience was really exciting, and I can't wait to see how those pieces fit together to tell their own story. I'm really excited about that. 2 things that make this unit an inquiry unit is an inquiry into the text, and then, like I said, an inquiry into themselves. So the inquiry into the text, the way that works is the students are, what I'm trying to get them to do is to read with curiosity, to read with the mindset of confusion is okay, and there are parts that are going to confuse me, and I'm going to work on my own and with my classmates to figure it out, and to do that independently. And to think about, what does this image mean, and why did she put this part here, and why is she shifting the way she's telling the story, and why is she spending so much time talking about her sister? I'm trying to get my students to ask their own questions. And so this is the first unit where I've provided no comprehension questions for them. We're not doing quizzes, I'm not doing read chapter 1 and then answer these 5 questions. That's a little scary though, because there are certain things that I want them to pull from the book, and I have to kind of let go and see what they take away from the book. So I think it's inquiry because their questions are driving their understanding of the book, their curiosity, what they want to talk about, their small group discussions. It's really about them exploring the book and not having a set of themes or topics or issues that I'm asking them to look for. It's really, dig into this book. It's so rich. What are you pulling from it? And then the second part, like I said earlier, is an inquiry into their own personal identity. And because the way I've tried to structure the unit is they're building this multi-genre memoir as we go through the unit and not just at the end. It's kind of sustained inquiry because I'm asking them each week to think about and write about a different aspect of who they are. And some of that, they really have to think about. They're not sure. And I'm asking them to dig through family photos and talk to people at home. And so I feel like some of, the things that they're doing, they kind of have the answers to, and some of them, they're trying to figure it out. It's messy, and there's less structure, and there's less knowing. So without, for example, a set of questions to guide the students during discussion, you don't really know where the discussion's going to go. Is it going to go anywhere? So that's a challenge. Because it is less structured and more open-ended and kind of fluid, you know, sometimes the students are not sure what to do with that, because in much of their, you know, experience in school, they're in very structured classes, and then to all of a sudden go to a space where there's material spread out and they can float around and look at different tables and tag on a chart paper and kind of move around. There's the possibility of, you know, no learning happening and students disengaging or, you know, messing around. So that's the tricky part. And then I think one of the challenges, but also beauties of inquiry, is that because it's open-ended and because we have these wide open questions, there are opportunities for the learning to go in different directions. But then also it extends the unit, because it's hard to say this is going to take 5 weeks. You know, we just had an election in this country, in Alabama, last night. And that election and those results and what's happening there directly connect to the book that we're reading now. There's another opportunity for learning. And that's going to, you know, extend the unit a little more and take learning into a slightly different direction. So you have to like be okay with that. We don't have all the answers, I don't have all the questions, and I don't have everything mapped out. It's kind of student driven in that way, so it can feel a little uncomfortable and kind of messy. Something that I really hope to learn in teaching this unit is how to really support kids to read and deeply understand a complex text independently. This book, although it is a graphic novel, is a very complex book. The students are tripped up by vocabulary on almost every page, yet I really want them to be able to manage reading a text and understanding a text like this on their own. Well, how do I do that? And I'm already having some trouble with that, and I'm realizing the support right now is not adequate. They need more. I got a question this morning about the word siege, salvage, amateur. You know, these are all words that as an adult, I read this text and they're just not on my radar. You know, there are some words where I know the kids are going to struggle with, and there are other words that I'm surprised, you know, that they don't know. And I remember the second week of school when we did our, you know, what makes reading challenging chart. Over and over on all the charts, the kids kept writing the words. We don't know the words, the vocabulary. And so it's just, vocabulary was just not one of my priorities, you know. It just never, I just thought there was so much more to teaching reading than that. But what I'm seeing is vocabulary is huge. But I also don't want to teach, you know, the 10 words a week. You know, like, here are the 10 words, here are the definitions, draw a picture, memorize them, here's the quiz. Like, but how do I do this and support them as they're reading this text? That's something that I really want to learn how to do better. This book is providing me with lots of great opportunities for that. So right now they're keeping a running word list, and in their discussions, they're supposed to be sharing those words and kind of solving words together as a team. That's not enough, though. I know that's not enough. So I'm doing some one-on-one. That's not enough. So, you know, that's something that I really hope to get better at and learn through this unit, is how to build their word-solving skills so they can do that independently. My students do, they do a ton of reading. I have independent reading almost every day at the beginning of the period, and I know what my students are learning because I'm meeting with them every day. So I have one-on-one reading conferences with them. I answer questions right on the spot as they're reading. I help them kind of troubleshoot as they're reading, as these comprehension, you know, issues come up. I'm able to coach them right away. I can see based on the kind of annotations they're making or the lack of annotations. Some of my students still struggle and, you know, using those metacognitive reading strategies, and what does that look like and what am I writing? So I actually keep their books and I flip through their books and I can see what kind of notes they're taking and what they're thinking about. And then we use Google Classroom, so we do a lot of writing on Google Classroom. I like to Maybe I do it too much, and they'll probably tell you I do it too much, but I have them reflect a lot. I'm always asking them to think about their learning and write about what they're learning and share that with me. And I want them to make their thinking visible through writing. So that's one way I can kind of keep track of what they're understanding and what I need, to reinforce or what they need more help with. So we do things like that. And then in terms of the writing, the way that I've done this multi-genre memoir, we have these checkpoints, so like this Friday we're doing the photo essay, so we're kind of like constructing it a piece at a time so I can hold them accountable and also make sure they don't fall behind. One thing that I would like to do to try to engage other teachers in doing this kind of work, in their classrooms with their students, is something that I've been toying with this year is how do I have the students do that kind of work and advocate for inquiry in their classes? What would that look like? What would that sound like? How could they go about saying, this inquiry unit was really successful for me. I did really well. I enjoy learning this way. Is there a way we can bring it into, another classroom that's not in the English department? Is there another way that we can bring it into someone else's class? In a way that doesn't hurt feelings, in a way that doesn't offend or, it doesn't minimize the good work that's going on, in my building and across the city. There's lots of good work, and it's not the end all be all. But it is a great, opportunity for rich learning. And even if it's one unit a year, it's a way to really bring kids in. So I am interested in figuring out how to engage the students in advocating for this work so that it's not just me or it's not a group of teachers saying, teachers should do it this way. But for the students to say, this really worked for us. We want to do this more. How can we do that? That's something that I'm just thinking about and figuring out now. And I think one way is going to be with Chi-Teen Lit Fest and getting my students ready for that and bringing that work back to the building and saying, this is the unit we did. This is the experience we had. These are the students that, are failing lots of other classes and are really rocking it here. Like, how can we leverage that, in their other classes so that more of our students are successful? So I think that's a possibility. I would say to teachers, who are reluctant to do an inquiry unit and not really sure where to start, to those teachers I would say, start small. I always have these big dreams of these crazy units with all these parts. And when you think like that, it's great, but it gets overwhelming really quickly. And then you don't do it. And that was my very first year trying it before I did the unit for Books Grant and before I had the partnerships. So I think trying to do too much and trying to plan the perfect unit can sometimes, it can create so much anxiety and stress that then you end up giving up on it. So I would say if you pick one piece, for example, the going public piece, start with something that's manageable. And maybe it's not the ideal and where you really want kids to be, but you got to start somewhere. So I would say that. The second thing I would say is honor students' questions. If you can do that and honor their questions and their curiosity in whatever unit you plan, I think that is definitely one of the important pieces to getting into a good inquiry unit, is just taking their questions, honoring their questions, and putting the burden of exploration and questioning on the students. And I think as teachers, we're kind of like trained to have all the questions, to ask all the questions. And then our students, their job is simply to answer them. But I think if we flip that around, that's another easy way to get into inquiry, is just turning the questions back on the kids and putting them in charge of that investigation. This unit, I'm really lucky. It just worked out that this unit was also written in collaboration with Chi-Teen Lit Fest. So it's just a perfect way, a perfect venue for my students to go public with their work. And because that's a tricky part of it, And you have to be creative in thinking about how am I going to take this learning and this work outside of the classroom. And then Chi-Teen Lit Fest kind of fell into my lap, and I went for it, and I wrote this unit for that project. So my vision is that my students will go to Chi-Teen Lit Fest. They'll share their work, but what I would really love them to do is to teach a workshop to other teens on how to create this multi-genre memoir, kind of a modified version of this multi-genre project. So I'm imagining my students doing some lessons on a quick photo essay, you know, like how to construct, like use images and captions and text to create this kind of piece that represents a piece of who you are. So thinking about the pieces that they're learning to do in the next, several weeks with this unit, and taking one of those and writing a lesson plan and practicing and taking that learning public by teaching others. I think that's one of the best ways to really demonstrate your understanding and learning is, can you share that with other people? Can you bring that joy of learning to other people? And then to see what other people produce is the most gratifying part of the experience. I have received so much support from Gear Up. I really feel I feel selfish in a way. Like I'm getting lots of support for Gear Up, and I feel lucky. I feel really fortunate. And quite honestly, I don't know how to share this work with other teachers that don't have that support. I'm afraid of that just because I lean on Gear Up and the center so much. I also go to the Young Adult Literature Conference, and that's where I stole all of these ideas. That's where I read Darkroom. That's where I learned about inquiry. That's where I learned about the stations, and really started thinking about teaching in a totally different way. And I wasn't like a rookie teacher. I'd been 12 years in the classroom, and then went to my first Young Adult Literature Conference 2 years ago and was blown away, and immediately wanted to throw everything I was doing out in the garbage and start from scratch because it was just so much more engaging and relevant.